Hey guys, Windsor here, and welcome to the Groove Guru podcast. And today I wanted to share some cool updates. There's first the upcoming Nosferatu album tour that I'm doing about a month from now. I have a cool announcement about my work with Zildjian Cymbal Company, and also I want to explore happiness a bit more, which if you've listened to any of these podcasts, you'll probably get that that's something I'm quite into. So getting started. The first thing, about a month from now, at the time of recording, sharing this podcast, I'll be drumming, singing and more on the Hugh Cornwell band Come and Get Some tour, in which we'll be performing the album Nosferatu live for the first time that's ever been done, and I am looking forward to that. And if you've not heard about that, the album Nosferatu, it's an album that was released in 1979, and it's a collaboration between Hugh Cornwell, original Strangler, and Robert Williams, who's probably best known for his work with Captain Beefheart as a drummer. And the album features a lot of collaboration, and Hugh and Robert on the album are complemented by an all-star cast. There's Mark and Bob Mothersbaugh from Devo are on it, Frank Zappa band member Ian Underwood guests on it. There's Ian Dury and the Blockheads, he's on a track, and also The Clash did BVs on one of the tracks, Puppets. And the narrative of the album Nosferatu, it draws inspiration from the mythos of Nosferatu. There was a 1922 silent movie, and the album Nosferatu, it draws not just from the vampire story, but it's also an exploration of some of the deeper psychological and cultural shadows that represents. And the album is divided into 10 separate plots, like each track. And in an interview with NME in 1979, Hugh described the first side as consisting of portions or episodes of an imaginary film about Nosferatu, and the second side is mostly studies in, let's just say, stranger corners of the psyche. And before I started playing the material and just listened to that album, initially when checking out Hugh's catalogue a few years ago, it wasn't an easy listen. And to be honest, there was nothing else that I'd heard that sounded quite like it. But what I heard was there was a lot of clever stuff and really imaginative creativity that went into that, and some really great playing as well. And when I started playing the album with a view to performing it live, initially some of the tracks individually, I realised that drumming wise it wasn't as straightforward as it appeared on the surface. And drumming wise, if you're a drummer and listening to this, or a curious music lover, if you've not already, I invite you to check out not just the album but the drumming of Robert Williams. He's known for playing with Captain Beefheart. There's a lot of great recordings in the 70s and I think early 80s. And Robert, he's a fantastic musician, as I see it, and as I see it, hugely underrated as a drummer. And the way that I often describe his drumming is that if you imagine a normal drum beat, well, it's not that. It's like anything but that. It's just very, very creative and very distinctive. And on the Nosferatu album, the drumming on that, musically, it's not just 4/4 4 beats in the bar. It's featuring a lot of, changing time signatures. There's polyrhythmic beats. There's some quite technically demanding drum parts and quite a few exotic rhythms. And it's pretty satisfying to play, I must say. And as a band and a musical unit, we've been working on the material on and off for a few years. A lot of those tracks from Nosferatu have always been present in Hugh's repertoire as long as I've played with him. And there was a recent point that we realised that we had enough of that material under our belt that we could play almost one side of it live. And we did that November, the end of 2024, where we played almost the whole of side 2. And then after that, Hugh decided that he wanted to play the whole thing. So here we go. And it's a lot of fun. And again, that tour, it's the Come and Get Some UK tour. The details and dates are on Hugh Cornwell's site, hughcornwell.com. And in terms of prep, individually and personally, I'm feeling pretty on it with the material. It's the point that it's already second nature with about a month to go. And yeah, there'll probably be some tweaks that we're doing. And what I want to point to is, if you're a musician listening to this or curious about the kind of work that it takes to prepare a set of material to a level of as much excellence as you can see, there's a podcast I recorded called How I Prepare for Tours as a Professional Musician. It's Groove Guru Podcast episode 12, and I invite you to check that out if you're interested, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And the next thing I wanted to explore today was that a few days ago I received a letter in the post from the Zildjian Company. Avidus Zildjian Company, who make arguably the finest cymbals in the world. And opening the envelope, I was presented a certificate signed by Debbie and Craigie Zildjian of the Zildjian Company, recognising that I've been a Zildjian artist for 20 years. And reflecting on that, there's been some really wonderful times with that. Of course, playing with Hugh Cornwell, I've played with Dr. John Cooper Clarke, Wishbone Ash, all using Zildjian cymbals. I've toured alongside Blondie and the Undertones and the Sex Pistol, Glenn Matlock, all playing those beautiful, shiny musical instruments. And I'm very grateful for that honour and that recognition. And when I saw the certificate and I held it in my hands and read it, I had this burst of excitement for about 5 seconds, and then it was just me holding a piece of paper. Now, again, I'm certainly super grateful for that recognition. And what I wanted to reflect on, it was that fleeting high of the excitement followed by the drop. It reminded me again that something that's true in my experience when seen and when not seen is also the cause of so much unnecessary suffering in people. That we have this experience that it can be filled with shiny moments and milestones and achievements and applause and acclaim, but lasting happiness, as I see it, is not found in any of that. And that I assert that real happiness, it isn't found in externals. And when I say real happiness here, I'm contrasting that with illusory happiness. That, as I'm suggesting, is the belief that we need to change this thing on the outside or achieve this thing in the world out there in order to feel okay in here. Which is basically, it's changing a condition on the outside in order to feel the way we want to feel on the inside. And I assert that that's backwards and is based on the presumption that the outside conditions that we experience determine how we feel, which, as I understand it and experience it, is not true. if you want to explore this, well, we can have outside conditions that can be the same. And yet, in the face of that, we can have this changing experience. Like, for example, we can be the same weight, all right, and have different feelings and perceptions and experiences about that without our weight changing. Or we can have the same amount of money in the bank, and without that number changing, we have different thoughts, experiences, feelings. And the same goes, it can be the same, we can have the same job or the same partner, yet with the same situation being in place, we have these different experiences. And why is that? Well, I want to point to that it's because our experience is created not from outside us, but from within us. We create our experience from the inside out, not the outside in. And this really relates to the nature of happiness that I'm going to dive into more right now. Now, beyond the surface level of thinking that you're a human being in the world trying to get by and survive, that's the premise that most people operate on. And when we start to look to the physics of how we actually create our experience, we can start to see how we can really access real happiness and actual freedom, which is before anything we think it is. There's a quote attributed to the physicist John Wheeler that goes, "There's no out there. Now, without trying to sound like a smart ass and quote physicists and things, it points to the principle that everything is created from within us. And in the understanding known as the three principles, which I love and share in my work with people, it points to how that works. That at core, we have pure creative integrity and an innately intelligent potential within us. That's what's known as mind. And as we think, it creates temporary distortions on top of that innate clarity, which we could describe as the power of thought. And that everything we think, we feel, which is brought to life by what's known as consciousness, which is also our awareness of the nature of how we create our experience. And we can use this power of thought that we have to think anything. And often that's that we're a separate self in a world of other separate selves, just trying to get by and make ends meet and survive. And all of that thinking and all of the judgments and resistance that we create psychologically is what creates all of our suffering psychologically. And we can also, and what's really beautiful, is use this power of thought to realize that underneath the noise of our thinking and our experience and our feeling is a space of pure freedom and happiness that's before the constraints and limitations of the personal mind. And that's where and what real happiness is. That's the level in, if you look at Zen Buddhism, they call Kensho, which can be a brief glimpse of enlightenment or happiness, or Satori, which is a more prolonged experience of that, which is known as our true self or our true nature. Some people, it's known as Buddha nature. Some people call it God. Some people call it love. But it's before any of those descriptions. And this is, it's not about religion. That's just words. Now, without getting too esoteric, when we don't see that we have this real happiness within us and we think it's out there, outside of us, it leads to chasing external conditions to find happiness there. And now, there's nothing wrong with seeking accomplishment and achieving things. I'm all up for that. But when we think that that's what brings us lasting happiness, I'm asserting that that's a guided understanding. And if we think that externals will bring us more happiness, okay, what do? As a musician, we'll seek the gigs, the endorsements, the fame, the profile, the recognition, and people seek promotions, more money, more stuff, more significance, and all of that. And when we get those things and move objects around in the world and arrange them in the way that we think will be happy in the experiencing of that, it can bring temporary happiness based on what we think and what we focus on in the moment. But as soon as our thought changes and goes elsewhere, then so does that apparent happiness. And that's why so many musicians and people who achieve fame, success, and recognition are often unhappy and get into addictions and can be a bit messed up, because they think that happiness on the apparent outside equates to lasting happiness on the inside. But that's not how life works, okay? But we don't see that because often we're not taught this. So for you, what's the thing that you think you need before you think you can be happy? And what if that's actually not true? And what if it's before the thing you think you need to be happy that you realize your real happiness? And the way I want to phrase it just now is that this true happiness, it's in the cessation of seeking happiness. And when you start to see beyond all of the things that you think you need to do and chase after in order to be happy, you naturally start to realize that inbuilt happiness and freedom that's your birthright and that people forget, okay? And when you realize this freedom and happiness, it doesn't mean that you don't do anything anymore and just become a monk. Now, and that's a valid path. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that when you see that your well-being is not dependent on achieving anything in the world, and that at core, you're free, you're whole and clear, and there's nothing wrong with you, you're not broken, you don't need fixing psychologically, you're free to go after anything you want. And it's easier because you're much more in a state of lightness, clarity, and with less of the unnecessary psychological stress. You're free to create and express in the world just because you can. And from that space of real happiness, there's nothing in the way of creating what you want. So, bringing this one to a close, I'll leave you with this. What's something that you'd love to create, knowing that your happiness is not dependent on that? Really pause and let yourself feel into that. Maybe even write it down. And as you sit with that, what's something you'd love to create, knowing your happiness is not dependent on it? You can notice there's a difference between chasing something to feel okay and creating from the deep okayness that's already within you. That's a shift that really changes everything. And if you want to explore this more deeply, your innate happiness and power to create, and actually experience the freedom that's already built in, I invite you to check out my Back to Clarity course, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, or you can get in touch with me via my website, windsordrums.com, if you're interested in working together. And for now, have fun, enjoy the lightness and freedom of your innate happiness every chance you get, and I'll speak with you soon.